All right, well, welcome to the blockchain and voting event that we're doing. Like I mentioned just a few, first of all, my name is Gerard Daché. I'm the executive director of the Government Blockchain Association. We do these events on a regular basis, and we do this really to promote a sort of a public dialogue. We have working groups which are sort of private and internal, and these groups are these things are more public. So I just want to just let you know a little bit about the meeting norms and a little bit about the Government Blockchain Association. So the Government Blockchain Association is a industry association of public and private partners. We have GBA members from around the world. We have GBA members in about 500 different government organizations at the local, state, national, and international level. And we organize around about 50 different working groups. Our voting working group is one of those working groups. We have chapters in about 120 cities around the world. And we do a lot of things. So I started the association as a meetup, not knowing anything about what associations are supposed to do. So apparently I broke a lot of the rules. So there's a lot of things about us that are sort of unusual for an association. We actually do build out technology. We're building out something called the Government Business Blockchain Platform, which is it's a multi-blockchain sort of backbone with gateways to other blockchains. And so if people build solutions on Ethereum or EOS or whatever, they can pass information and assets across blockchains. And then we have members all around the world hosting those nodes. And we build on them government applications for everything from citizen services like birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses. We're building out an emergency management platform that will cover stuff like that, healthcare. And so our goal is to create a fabric of people through these different working groups and communities, and a fabric of technology that allow for the interconnection, interoperability, and scalability of solutions. So blockchain kind of came out onto the scene as something that could solve a lot of problems, but there's a lot of work that has to get done if blockchain will ever be able to realize its potential in terms of solving those problems. And part of that is we need to really understand what the barriers and what the challenges are, and because of that, it's great to have meetings like this where we can talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. So let me tell you a little bit about this particular meeting. It's going to be different than many of our meetings. This is a discussion. It's not a webinar, right? And Marina, to your point, I'll change the settings because we do want to allow people to have a free interactive use. That I'll do that in a few minutes. And we really do encourage participation by the audience, but we have to follow some rules just because of the number of people that we typically have involved in this. First of all, I'd like to state this is a controversial topic. There are people with sort of religious perspectives on all sides of this. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do is to be respectful, right? Today, we're talking about the technology. So what I don't want us to do is to talk about people, companies, or anything that can be divisive. What I'd really like to do is talk about what are the technologies, what are their vulnerabilities, what are ways that we can accomplish, we can solve problems. So this is really intended to be a very sort of positive and hopefully very enlightening event. This is being recorded, so we're asking that you, if for your sake, only use your first name. If you want to use a name, your full name, by all means, feel free to. I would just prefer that you not have like a phone number or some wacky thing. So recommend just your first name, but if you like to, your full name. If you're not speaking, please keep muted and your video off. Our production people do take this and they actually put together some really nice output, which will potentially make it available on YouTube, and so you can share your comments or the whole video with folks. We also cut it up and use it for bits. So if you like the bit that we do about you, by all means, feel free to share and do that. When you want to speak, so the format for this is I'm going to ask each of the panelists, they have about 10 minutes to introduce themselves and then to make a brief opening statement. We're going to run through that for pretty much the first hour and a half, just based on the number of speakers that we have. And then I'm going to open it up for discussions. I will ask you to raise your hand and be recognized, just so that we don't have total pandemonium. And feel free to challenge, right? This is we have people on the call that have very different opinions and ideas, and I've always believed that criticism and opposition is one of the best way to learn, as long as you are not dogmatic, as long as you're open, and we just have to address all these comments to move forward as a community. And so let me just sort of set the scope. Oh, and then, like I said, each of the speakers have 10 minutes. Again, I'm going to be kind of like a contractor with an RFP, right? If it says it's due by 5 o'clock and you bring it in at 5:01, they'll shut you down. So unfortunately, that's not my nature, but I'm going to have to be like that for this particular call. In terms of setting the stage, right? These are the 4 bullet points that we advertised on the event, right? We want to talk about how secure is blockchain-based voting compared to current voting methods. And one of the things that many of us have had conversations is in this dialogue and debate, sometimes blockchain-based voting has been compared to in-person voting, right? And that may not be an apples to apples comparison, right? Blockchain-based voting may be more aptly compared to remote voting. And so we'll talk about the comparison of different technologies and their uses. We want to talk a little bit about the legal, regulatory, and technical and political issues impacting blockchain-based voting. So we've got an election officials, and one of our speakers essentially is stuck in traffic and is making their way to a place. So we may have to, depending on whether she's available or not, we might have to switch things up just a tiny bit. But I think she's speaking near the end, so we should be good. We also want to talk about what the current tools and solutions are that can be used to support blockchain-based voting. And so we do have a vendor, a company that essentially makes a solution. So we want to hear what they have to say. And then we want to talk about what are the standards, right? My understanding is the standards in this area really are not adequate in order to be able to implement. And I'm using the term voting, right? I think that we'll also talk a little bit about the word election versus voting. So some of the speakers have a position that blockchain may have a place in the election process, but not specifically for voting. So we want to hear what they have to say. I tend to use the term voting in a more generic sense. So let me apologize for that up front. And then the criteria that we want to talk about is from a convenience perspective, right? And this is from the perspective of the voter. We want to talk a little bit about what are these different technologies and how does convenience play a role, especially when we're talking about certain communities like the disabled or overseas. We want to talk about the concept of anonymity versus privacy, resilience, meaning if there is something like a pandemic and people can't get to the polls, how do we deal with that? We want to talk about accessibility, security, auditability, trust, and so these are the things that in general we'll be thinking about as the speakers. Many of the speakers have put together slides, and so they've got the game plan, but when we get into the questions and answers and discussions, these are the kinds of things that we want to be talking about. Right. So let me just tell you a little bit about our speakers. Susan Eustace is the GBA voting working group lead, and she's really going to talk about what's wrong with how we vote now. And she is very passionate and has a lot of data about the use of paper ballots and alternatives. Audrey is with us from, Audrey Malgon is with us from Verified Voting, and she's going to share with us a little bit about the current vulnerabilities in elections and what kind of criteria do we need for safe alternatives. Jeremy and John, Jeremy Epstein and John Sebas, they're going to share with us maybe some of the blockchain may be applicable in some cases, but certainly not in others. And they're going to tell us a little bit about why that is, and share with us some research done by very prominent organizations on the subject. So there's been a lot of work, and they'll share with us some of the research and studies and how that relates to the topic today of blockchain voting. Amelia Powers Gardner, she's with Utah County. She's the chief election official out there. She's going to talk a lot about the underserved communities, typically referred to as UCAVA, but these are handicapped and disabled and overseas. And what do we need to do to serve them better? Philip Andre he's an electronic voting consultant. He's working with Votes, and that's an application or a system for remote ballot delivery, marking, and return. So he's going to talk about why that's important and how do you safeguard that. And then Giles and Mitya are they're going to they're involved in communities that are looking at this from an entirely different perspective with just incredible ideas and concepts about crowdsourcing and innovative technology, and really sort of looking into the future. So as you can tell, we have a lot to cover. And with that, I want to turn this over to Sue. Oh, and by the way, at the end, we will make these resources available to you. So with that, Susan, if you wouldn't mind unmuting your mic, I'm going to pull up your presentation, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Gerard. I'm Susan Eustace. I lead the voting working group for GBA. I've been involved in elections since 1945. I know a lot about elections. I worked a great deal on with IBM on MQ series, getting it so we could have secure message transport, which I think is fundamental when you start talking about remote voting. And today I want to talk about paper ballots, vote auditing on a national scale, and smartphone voting. Let's get those phones out and start putting ballots on the screen. So the first thing I learned over the years is paper ballots have inherent vulnerabilities. I know that recently paper ballots have been embraced as a good backup system to create a secure system, but we should think about that in the context of the vulnerabilities of paper ballots. The counts change during a recount. You go back to the governor's election in 1960 in Massachusetts. It was terrible. And can we go back a slide, Gerard?
Okay, yeah, I'm just going to wait until you tell me to advance, okay?
Okay. And so recount with paper ballots, there's just a huge history of the election count changing when they go back and look at the paper ballots a second time. And during an election, the person counting the ballots can change the marks on the ballot. They can put something under their fingernail. There's a number of ways. They can swap ballots. They can put on a bad mark. Stacks of ballots can disappear. Okay, go to the next one. And the way you know this is you look back at the paper ballot case law to see the problems with paper ballots. Extra marks invalidate the ballot. It's easy for a counting team to destroy a ballot without detection by inserting a mark. I used to sell voting machines many years ago, and I did invent the first electronic voting machine. And the people I sold to used to say, well, my Uncle Joe, and they tell me this years later, I really didn't want him to go to jail. He was changing the paper ballots while he was counting them, and I love him. And so I bought the voting machine. So those were the old mechanical machines. And there's a whole lot of things that you can see if you go through the 100,000 court cases of recounts and contested elections over a couple hundred years. Go ahead, Gerard, next slide. Where the results change during the recount. And one of the problems with paper ballots is the old James Michael Curley slogan of here in Boston, vote early and often. And he embraced paper ballots. He built his political machine leveraging the difficulties of managing a paper ballot election. And I dated a guy that used to sit at his table, and this is many years ago, and they would take a stack of ballots and they would mark them the way they wanted the election to come out. And then, somehow that stack of ballots got substituted for the actual stack of paper ballots. So you want to prevent that from happening. And I've worked many years consulting to different places to fix those problems. And the way we fixed it was by having poll workers from opposing parties go in and watch everything and look and make sure that it was truly people from opposing parties that were signing the results. Okay, go ahead, John. And we check the signatures of the poll workers in Chicago. When we set up the State Board of Elections after the Kennedy election was stolen, we in 1970, we were able to stop using all Democrats as poll workers and make sure that it was truly people from opposing parties in each poll site. And then you check the signatures of those poll workers. That's how you eliminate fraud. Get the opposing parties and check the signatures. Let's go ahead, Jaron. And if you want to see the problems with election systems, you go back, you look at contested elections, you look and you see electronic vote tabulating and scanning. It's really good to have a paper ballot backup of an electronic machine. You want both systems, and you want people from opposing parties watching every single thing that happens. And one of the problems that you see on paper ballots and in a lot of the electronic systems is that doesn't prevent overvoting. I've seen over the years as many as 10% of the votes are lost because of the overvotes. Ballots can be manipulated by poll workers. As I said, with a pencil or pen, stacks of ballots can be manipulated. Pre-marked stacks of ballots can be substituted for real ballots. And then blank votes are a problem if they are not really a blank vote, if they were something that didn't work because of overvoting. Go ahead, Jaron. So here, I went back, I've looked at case law, dug out over the years. I have numerous examples of case law. This is just one example. Where the question is, are they voting on the voting machine, or is it really a paper ballot? Those are issues that are really significant. Go ahead, Jaron. And I am a graduate of Barnard College, and I studied government and mathematics. I had a dual major, and I love constitutional government. I have a brother who's a very, very well-known constitutional lawyer. He teaches constitutional law, very distinguished, lots of papers. And so constitutional government is just part of my DNA. And the US has a constitutional government, we the people. It has 3 independent branches of government: the courts, the legislature, and the presidency. And no one branch can just say if there's fraud. You have to, yeah, stay with it just a minute. No one branch can say there's fraud. It has to be ultimately the courts. But the courts have to listen to what's going on and what the people think. In the end, the courts are used to determine how many votes were cast, either from fraud or by mistake. And that's what I said. I've gone back and looked at the 100,000 court cases that are really part of our election law. It isn't just the laws that the state governments have passed. It's also all that court cases. Let's go, John.
Right, to 3-minute warning, actually 2-minute warning.
Huh? What's that?
2-minute warning.
Okay. How many slides do I have left?
6 or 7.
Oh, well, we'll just get to what we get to.
Okay.
So the audit process is, and people, you can get this deck. Just ask Gerard or whoever you ask. Just go through the deck if you're interested. And I'm always available to answer questions through the GBA. The audit process, I think, is going to become far more important than it has been in running our election and determining who really won. The poll workers from opposing parties need to be really from opposing parties, because that's, as I said, how James Michael Curley and those guys, the people in Chicago, New York, Louisiana, they all manipulate elections by using poll workers from one party, and then one party, and you see it in South America. Gerard has people that come in and complain about one party can do if you don't have opposing parties watching the process. You have to check on the validity of the balloting. The poll workers watch each other to protect against fraud. In a close election, there are not enough votes to cover the margin between the candidates. And in this case, often the elections get overturned unless you have a really good election system. And that's where I'm going to start talking about the cell phone voting. Gerard, why don't we skip to that one?
Well, I tell you what,
The last slide, right?
yeah, we're at 19. So let's go there. And by the way, I will create there is a QR code that we'll share with everybody so they can get everything they want.
Oh, maybe
Which
one up. Is there one? No, up there. This
smart,
smartphone voting advantages. I see everyone owns a smartphone. We're going to go to voting by screen.
Hey, Susan, let's cover this in the question and answer period, right? So I can bring this slide back up, but it's 10:20 now, and I got to turn it over to Audrey. So
Okay, bye-bye.
we'll cover this. So Audrey, the floor is yours. Would you like to share your screen?
You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just unmute and I will.
And then Jeremy, if you're ready to go at 11:30, we'll bring you up at 11:30.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. I am Audrey Malagon. I'm a mathematician, and I serve as mathematical advisor to Verified Voting. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization whose mission is really to strengthen democracy for all voters. And a lot of our work lies at the intersection of technology and elections. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is technology and especially blockchain technology, its implications and issues in voting. So I want to highlight a couple of key characteristics of blockchain voting and the issues that the implications that these have for elections. So as you're aware, blockchain technology removes a central authority and allows a large enough group of users to make decisions, decide what the official record is, even discarding records if those are not in agreement, if those are found to not be what the correct consensus determines. And blockchain technology is really good at keeping information on a blockchain secure. You can tell when something has been tampered with. It keeps that information secure. So what issues do these characteristics present for elections? Well, it removes the central authority and allows a large enough group of users to make decisions and even discard records. We can see ways in which that can be problematic for elections, not having some central authority and guidance there. And even though it's really good at keeping information on the blockchain secure, it keeps any information, even bad information, that reaches the blockchain secure. So we're really concerned about making sure that information that gets to the blockchain is correct. A lot of our concerns lie on the transmission of that information before it actually gets to the blockchain. And unfortunately, really secure blockchain on the end doesn't address some of the true issues with internet or mobile voting. And so you've heard and you'll hear a lot today about concerns with paper ballots and traditional voting methods and ways that we need to mitigate those. But what you need to be aware of is that there are parallel concerns and vulnerabilities when we use electronic methods. And we need to really keep those in mind because often those are more difficult to mitigate and they can have more widespread implications. So what vulnerabilities does using technology in elections introduce? Well, if we're transmitting actual votes electronically, transmitting votes over the internet, and here, as opposed to what Gerard said about voting in a broad sense, I'm really talking about transmitting voted ballots. Those votes could be subject to alterations before they even enter the blockchain. If we're using internet or mobile voting, we're relying on individual devices, which can be vulnerable to malware. Election servers can be vulnerable to attacks. For hosting elections on the internet, those can be subject to denial of service attacks. And anytime we're transmitting voters' identity and their votes together, we need to be aware of the potential for widespread privacy violations. So these are vulnerabilities that we need to keep in mind when we think about voting electronically. And in particular, I want to talk about the challenges that electronic voting poses for audits. So we saw in this past election the importance of post-election audits. We've seen risk limiting audit pilots and risk limiting audits really take hold across the nation in many states. We saw in this atmosphere of disinformation and distrust how important some of these post-election verifications were to give confidence in the reported outcome. And so if we vote in a way that doesn't produce a voter verified paper ballot, that's a real challenge for auditing. And I really want to highlight that simply printing a ballot on the receiving end isn't enough, because when we conduct these statistical audits, we are using an underlying assumption that the paper we're auditing has been verified by the voter. That the voter, if the voter never interacts with that piece of paper that you've printed on the receiving end, then we can't be sure that that piece of paper is reflecting the same intent that the voter marked on their whatever device they use to vote. So the voter has to have an opportunity to verify that paper record. Otherwise, we can perform the mathematical process, we can calculate a risk limit, we can do all that, but it's analogous to doing that with a box of ballots that we found in a hallway with the lid off. Yes, there's ballots in there, they were cast by voters, but do we know that they really truly reflect the correct voter intent? So we have to have proper chain of custody on paper ballots in order to perform audits, and transmitting those electronically produces an issue there. We can end up excluding voters that used this new technology from any authentic post-election audit. And this can really open up avenues for distrust in the entire election outcome, even if it's a small group of voters or a small pilot that we're voting this way. Especially when margins are close. We have to be aware of the potential for distrust that can sow if we can't perform an authentic audit on a voter verified paper ballot. So why is this so hard? Why is technology in elections so difficult? Well, we really need to keep in mind that it is not the same as e-commerce or digital record keeping when we're talking about actually transmitting votes or voted ballots electronically. Technology has advanced in a lot of arenas, but transmitting votes really presents unique challenges. And the reason for this is because we're trying to do two things simultaneously that are really difficult to do at the same time. We have constitution.
Audrey, I gotta give you just a 3-minute warning.
We're good. Well, we'll wrap it up here. No problem. Just a couple slides left. We have a constitutional right to a secret ballot. We need to keep the voter's identity secret and separate from their vote, but we also need to provide a voter verified record of voter intent. And so paper ballots present one way to do this. I can mark my ballot in whatever way I mark it, but I can verify that my vote on this piece of paper lives on in the sea of ballots that cannot be traced back to me. So we have to keep in mind that these two things have to be done simultaneously, however we're voting. These are the issues we have to address at the same time, and they're difficult. These are difficult to address at the same time. That's why this becomes such a challenging problem. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't seen successful methods that are able to do both of those same things. You'll hear a lot today about improving turnout and improving access to the vote, which is really an important issue to address. But you should be aware that so far, the studies show actual little to no improvement in turnout with electronic voting methods, sometimes even decreased turnout. And all of the available systems have shown serious security vulnerabilities. Verified Voting's Internet Voting Resources page has papers on this that you can access and read. There's some security analysis of the systems that are currently available. And then we just also want to keep in mind as we are trying to solve these issues, because there are issues with access. We do want everyone to have access. We want them to be able to vote. We just want to make sure their votes are actually counted as they were cast. So keep in mind, there are some safer options. You'll probably hear a lot about overseas military voters today. That's a group that has unique challenges. One option for them is a prepaid mail label. that on average is coming back within 3 to 5 days. That's within a 45-day window to vote. The MOVE Act requires blank ballot delivery electronically. That doesn't present the same security issues as sending a voted ballot back. So that's another option. And there are secure.
I got to give you a 1 minute voting, 1 minute warning.
No problem. Oops, I went the wrong way. I do want to point out that there are also secure, remote accessible vote by mail options that produce a paper ballot that voters can verify. They can use assistive technology. We can use technology in a responsible way and produce something that we can audit later. So
Awesome.
Just end with this slide here. We want to keep all three of these things in mind, and we don't want to sacrifice security while we're trying to solve other issues. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And listen, while we're transitioning over to Jeremy, if you'd like to make those slides available, then just email it to me and I'll put them in the downloads folder so people can get access to them if you choose to do that. And then we'll make that QR code available at the end. Jeremy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm Jeremy Epstein. I've been working in the cybersecurity field for over 30 years now, since long before it was called cybersecurity. My day job is with the National Science Foundation, where I lead the largest cybersecurity research program in the world. We have somewhere between 900 and 1,000 active research projects going on, some of which are voting. And I'm also the chair of the voting committee of the Association for Computing Machinery's U.S. Technology Policy Council, which is the public policy arm of the biggest association of professional computer scientists in the world. So what do the experts say? Well, if you talk to experts about voting, you get the answer that you see on XKCD here. If there's anyone on this webinar this discussion who is not familiar with XKCD, make sure you take a look. Very informative, technically interesting cartoons that address difficult problems in a very succinct way. Basically, the problem is we don't know how to build secure software. You may hear from other folks that, oh, we know how to build this securely, it's perfect, but it's not the case. We have hacks every day. If we knew how to build secure software, we wouldn't all be patching our devices constantly. It just wouldn't be happening. So let's see, why did that stop advancing? There we go. So there are a bunch of policy issues that we need. I'm sorry, I missed that one. Okay, so is blockchain the answer? This is a great slide developed by the Department of Homeland Security to try to help you figure out, is blockchain the solution for the whatever problem you're trying to solve? And this is a great way to figure it out. And it turns out that for many election-related needs, blockchain is a good thing. But for voting, it's not, because if you go through this flowchart, you'll see over and over again, you don't have multiple organizations contributing data. It's not a good thing that you want to share all data with all users for all times. For example, if there's a vulnerability in the encryption method and I can find out who you voted for 10 years from now, that is a significant threat. That's why physical ballots get destroyed after a reasonable period of time after the elections. To prevent these sort of things, that's why we ensure that voters don't write their names on ballots, things like that. Blockchain does away with that potential of long-term voter privacy. So some of the policy issues we should be addressing for internet voting in general and blockchain voting in particular: does it enfranchise or disenfranchise voters? Well, it depends who you're talking about. Many Americans, and this is true in other countries as well, do not have smartphones, do not have access to high-speed internet. So solutions that rely on this increase the bias in our elections today. It's very hard, coercion is very hard to prevent in any remote voting system, whether it's paper or internet. One of the few solutions is Estonia's multi-vote model, where you can vote as often as you want, but only the last one counts. That only works because every voter has a smart card and there's a lot of other technology behind it. It's not a simple thing to do. What are the impacts on election offices of doing, say, blockchain voting? Potentially fewer poll workers. That would generally be a positive thing, but you need a lot more tech support to deal with the complexities. Digital identities are a big challenge if you're doing blockchain and having to issue every voter a digital identity. Is it going to increase or decrease public trust in election results? I know we can say as techno geeks, oh, everybody can see this because the blockchain is public, but it's more observable in some respects, but it's less observable to non-technical experts. They have to trust their friendly neighborhood blockchain expert, and most people are just going to say that's magic. Today, with paper, we can look at it. Yes, there are some problems as have been identified, but we address some of the problems with paper with appropriate countermeasures of having people from both major parties or in other countries, even many parties observing. You just can't do that in blockchain. It doesn't work. And what are the long-term risks of blockchain voting? What happens if we discover a vulnerability in the software, or there's a crypto cracking, say through quantum computing, and now everybody's vote gets disclosed? And we can say this is FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but the reality is we're seeing the threats of quantum now, and we're also seeing the problems that have happened with other blockchain related technologies like Bitcoin that have enabled theft of data and theft of Bitcoin currency. So we can't take those risks with voting. And how scalable are the failures? We know how to quantify the theft of an individual or ballot box stuffing with individual ballots. That's a retail level threat. But blockchain attacks are wholesale. If somebody can infiltrate the devices, infiltrate the software, say with a supply chain attack like we saw in the case of, what was it called, just the other week, where the software is modified before it's installed or as part of an update, then everybody can get wiped out at once. So is it a good idea? There's some strong reasons that we might hope it is. It could increase the turnout, except as Audrey said, it doesn't. The studies have shown that that Estonia is the only place where turnout went up, and it took 15 years before they saw an increase in turnout with online voting. It could enable access by people with disabilities. Unclear how well that'll work, but it's possible. It may make it easier for people who live far from a polling place or during COVID. Those are certainly positives, but the downside is it increases the opportunity for hacking. It's not equally available to everyone. Most or many people will not have access to a device that can participate. And what do you do if there's a controversy about the results? So we can look to the experts, the National Academies of Science, which has the role established in law to advise Congress and the president. They say just don't do it. We're not ready for it. And I tend to believe the scientists. This is one thing we've seen over the past year in particular, is believe the scientists. The scientists are telling us don't use internet voting, don't use blockchain voting. But are there places in elections where blockchain could help? Absolutely. Voter registration systems could be improved. We could do a lot of useful stuff with online absentee ballot requests, perhaps using reporting election results, but digital signatures are probably good enough for that. So before I wrap up, because I still have 2 minutes, I do want to comment about some of the concerns that, well, why can't we just rely on an app sitting in our phone? Well, apps in the phone themselves, they have supply chain problems. We've seen there are frequently bugs in apps. A lot of times it's just an error. It's not intentional, but they might record the wrong thing. You say vote for Smith and they show you Smith on the screen, but they actually record Jones. That sort of thing happens more frequently than we might want. Even if the app is perfect though, there may be other apps in your phone or your other device that are observing what that app is doing and inferring how you're voting and reporting that to someone else. And you can say, well, that's completely abstract or that's completely untenable. In fact, it happens. There are apps that watch what you do and then they report to other places, even if they can't directly observe it using what are called side channels. So if we believe in the secret ballot, we can't go to this technology. We need to recognize that paper isn't perfect, but It's much better, and it reduces the threat to elections overall. And finally, I want to wrap this up because I know I have 45 seconds left, is to just reemphasize the threat of retail versus wholesale tax. Blockchain is an attacker's dream, because once, if everyone goes to blockchain voting, then an attack will be much more scalable for the bad guys, for the attackers, than it is for the defenders. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And I know people are sort of chomping at the bit, wanting to address each one of those topics, but we're going to have to move on.
Well, that's fair, because I'm going to want to address each of the points that other people will make as well.
Exactly. And listen, we're going to try to make some time for that, but I'll talk later about how maybe we can create a mechanism for that. So John, let's see, John, you're next. I have uploaded your slides into the downloads folder. So when you're done, folks can be able to get those, but the floor is yours.
Okay, great. We got audio, we got video. Gerard?
Yep, I see you.
Okay. And did you want to run through the slides with me, or I can just talk through them? It doesn't matter either way.
No, you can share your screen and share your slides directly if you like.
No, that's all right.
Would you like me to pull them up?
That would be easier. That would be easier for me. I got
all right.
too many notes.
You start talking. You start talking. I'll pull it up.
You bet. So a little bit about myself. My name's John Sebas. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Open Source Election Technology Institute. That's an organization that has a mission very similar to what Audrey articulated about verified voting in terms of working at technology, policy, and improving elections. What's different about us is we mostly actually build the election technology ourselves. So that's really the goal, is to build open source election technology for U.S. elections. And indeed, part of what we do is building remote voting solutions. So I'm going to tell you straight up front most of what my talk is about in 1 minute, and then go through a few slides and pose a question for discussion. So straight up, before we do slides, here's my message. I'm talking about blockchains for digital remote voting in the United States. Okay, so internet voting, whatever you want to call it. But I call it digital remote voting. So a blockchain is really the wrong thing to be using for any kind of voting, and I'll explain why very briefly. So a blockchain is a distributed digital ledger. That's a term of art. It's a technology thing. It's a distributed digital ledger for recording cryptocurrency transactions. Okay, so digital ledger technology has been around for a long time. Blockchain is a more recent variant. It's tuned to the problems of cryptocurrency, and elections lack most of the problems that the particular kind of ledger a blockchain is. Jeremy showed you that flowchart. Do you need a blockchain? That's a flowchart that you use to decide, do I need a digital ledger that does all the stuff that a cryptocurrency needs? In most cases, the answer is no, because blockchains have 3 essential features that make them not useful for elections, but great for money. But here's the plus message that I want to get to today. However, digital ledger technology with different variations, not the way you do it for cryptocurrency, is probably very, very useful for elections, including for remote voting. But we need some real problems. So I'm going to talk about a problem the digital ledger technology can address in elections, and to do so into use cases. So that's my deal. So much for my speaker notes, and let me ask Gerard to address this, advance the slide. So what are election problems? What's a blockchain solution for? Keep going, Gerard, please. So this, what you're seeing right here is exactly just what I said before in writing, to say that blockchains, specifically as used for cryptocurrency, are not the solution to any election problem. However, if we advance the slide, we can see a little bit about why I say that. So what do we mean when I say a blockchain has essential characteristics that are important for digital money? You can see that on the slide. I won't read them, but the general idea is, in a cryptocurrency blockchain, anyone can append to the chain, anyone can join the network and become part of the network, and anyone can view the contents. That's not useful for elections because ballots aren't money, and that's not useful for elections because election officials have to have central control. That's the law. Next slide, please, Jared. So since that kind of digital ledger technology, cryptocurrency, is not useful for elections, what are some variations that are useful? Well, to answer that question, we need specific use cases about specific problems in elections today. And here's 2 use cases. In voter registration, we need immutable records. We don't have them today. If we're doing digital remote voting, we need immutable storage of those ballots that are returned digitally, sometimes called a digital ballot box. We don't have that today. And there might be other use cases. Jared, could you advance the slide, please? Some people have talked about publishing cast vote records and vote tallies and election results and all that. That's not really a good third use case. Digital signatures will probably do that. That's not a situation where there's multiple writers. That's one entity, a county elections office, publishing some numbers. So if you'll advance the slide again, Gerard. So I don't know what number 3 is. There might be others, but here's 2 that we can talk about if you'd advance the slide once more. Okay, so here's the problem. Here's a real world problem. So in election technology today, data is very vulnerable. It's vulnerable to tampering by technology people who are working for election officials. Now, as several speakers have noted, election officials have the ability to do all sorts of nasty stuff and mess with elections, sure. But in addition to that, and by the way, that is an accepted threat model of election law. It's accepted, and there's countermeasures to deal with those risks. We don't have countermeasures to deal with computer people messing with the data behind elections. And it's not just system administrators, network administrators, database administrators. It's all those people, but also the technology of the tools they use and the supply chain of that technology. And it's not just that. It's also nation state adversaries who can acquire the capabilities of these techie folks via malware, phishing, bribery, and so forth. So the real question here is, how do you store critical data and protect it from tampering by these threats that are credible, proven threats, as we've now seen in the past few election cycles? If you'd advance the slide, please. Okay, so I'm here to say that a different type of digital ledger technology can meet this challenge in at least 2 use cases, but with a different type of digital ledger technology, making different choices than we do for blockchains for cryptocurrency. I won't read the slide, but you can see a little table here. And if you want to know more, you can get the slides and we can talk later. But there's very different choices about how you operate a digital ledger tech for elections, and it's proven, and ledgers like that exist today. So if you advance the slide. So we're not going to use blockchains. We are going to use digital ledgers. How's that going to work? Well, a digital ballot box is one of those cases, and so are voter records. So Jeremy mentioned that before. So we've already developed proof of concept technology at OSET for how the introduction of a digital ledger into a voter registration system can create immutable storage for voter records data in a way that prevents them from being undetectably tampered via all the threats that I just mentioned. So that's a big deal. And you can do exactly the same type of immutable data storage for digital ballots that have been returned by a digital voting system or an internet voting system or a mobile voting system, whatever you call it. Because today we have this problem. Digital ballots, like paper ballots, have to be under the election official's physical control. They can't be vulnerable to tampering by IT staff or nation state adversaries. If we did without this type of data protection.
Hey, John, I just got to give you, you got a 2-minute warning.
Great. So if we did without this type of protection, it would be like having paper drop boxes with keys given to all the computer geeks and letting them copy the keys to anybody they want. So that's something that's really helpful. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Next slide. So when I say necessary, I just explained that. Not sufficient means there are many other security issues in digital voting. I've listed them here. Other speakers have listed them as well. And by itself, digital ledger technology does not solve these problems. That would be ambitious. Nor does it mitigate the risk to a level that's commensurate with paper ballots, which is a reasonable goal. One more slide, I think. Right. So everything that I just said really boils down to when we digitally automate parts of elections that are done with paper, we need to retain the processes, procedures, and adherence to legal requirements that have been established for paper ballots. So I think a great question for discussion is how can blockchain, or really digital ledger technology, be injected into the technology of elections without requiring legislatures to rewrite election laws? And if you could advance the slide one more time, I think we'll be done. There we go. Build it and they will come is not the way that we're going to get adoption, because actually, if you'll advance it one more time, if we have technology that doesn't fit into the way people are running elections, we're going to get election officials, too long didn't read, too busy running my election. So we got to figure out how to make that fit with practice, law, and regulation. And I think that would be a great discussion topic. I'm done.
All right, John, thank you so much. That was phenomenal. Again, I'm looking forward to see putting all these dots together for subsequent ones. Okay, so the next on the agenda is Amelia. So Amelia, the floor is yours.
Okay, I didn't have pre-prepared slides. I had just sent you my bullet points. I don't know if you put those on a slide or not.
Sure, I'd be happy to pull them up.
Pulling that up. My name is Amelia Powers Gardner, and I am the county clerk in Utah County, Utah. We are a county of about 700,000 citizens and about 330,000 active registered voters. I am actually the elections official who runs the election. So I'm going to be bringing in a dose of reality to the conversation to talk about actuals rather than theories. So I am a leader in the space of digital voting. Now, I want to caveat that by saying that I am a vote by mail county. We do early voting at the polls. We do election day voting at the polls. We mail every single one of our 330,000 active registered voters a ballot. We do signature verification at a high level. We are an identification state. So if you're showing up at the polls on election day, you require a picture ID. I have embraced this concept of remote ballot marking devices because I like Audrey's stool that showed voter access and security. I believe that if we do not give voters access to a ballot, we are in essence putting a poll tax on them. I think that every person who has a right to vote needs to also have access to a ballot. And I have found through personal experience of myself and my staff, as well as from feedback from my citizens, that the current methods available just simply do not serve all of our citizens. And every time that we do not make it available for someone to vote, we are taking away their constitutional right to vote. So I've been really pushing for this space for certain demographics. So I want to talk about implementing new technology. So new technology coming, it should be adopted with a couple of things in mind. Number one, we need to compare it to what's actually happening. So I understand that Audrey was talking about overseas voters and it only takes 3 to 5 days to get your ballot back. And that's a really cute idea, but it just frankly doesn't happen. And so when we're looking at overseas and military voters, I have had story after story after story, complaint after complaint after complaint of our men and women serving in the military who don't get their ballot. They don't have access to a printer to print out a ballot, to fill it out, and they can't return that ballot. In fact, my chief deputy was serving in the military. He was in the Marine Corps serving in Fallujah, Iraq in 2008, never received his ballot. That same exact year, I was an expat living in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, just 8 hours north of the US border in a non-war zone, and I never received my ballot. Now, I had access to a printer. I could have printed off a ballot at work, filled it out, and sent it back. But Josh, living in Fallujah, Iraq, serving in the Marine Corps, did not have access to a printer. So we need to look at things rather than in theory, the most important thing is we need to look at things in reality. I think Susan Eustace pointed out very well that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of prosecuted cases where paper at the polls on election day was used to fraudulently swing an election. And election fraud has been prosecuted in paper at the polls on election day. So I want to look at any of these new technologies. Do I think any of them are absolutely safe, 100% secure? Absolutely not. But what I do as an election official is I'm comparing them to what we currently have. And what we currently have is a system that disenfranchises millions of voters. For example, if people with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, we'd have 2.4 million more voters in this country every election. So this brings me into my next point, why we need to expand ballot access for people with disabilities, people with housing insecurity, or in the case of a natural disaster. In my county, on June 28th of 2020, we had a wildfire that evacuated one of our cities completely. And this happened 48 hours before the election. We tend to get about half of our ballots returned within the last 36 hours of the election. So half of the people that were going to vote in that primary election, their ballot was on their fridge, on their counter, on their kitchen table. They had not returned it yet. And when you're grabbing your children and your animals and your heirlooms and getting in your car and evacuating as quickly as you can, you don't think to stop and grab your ballot. Now, you say, well, maybe those people could just show up at the polls and vote, but we are a paper at the polls jurisdiction. And you can't just go down to Kinko's and buy paper or Staples and buy paper for ballots, because it's a security feature that our scanners will only scan ballot paper. And that ballot paper comes from a manufacturer that only sells that paper to us or our print vendors. I literally did not have enough paper to print ballots on to allow the people that were evacuated from their homes in the wildfire to vote. Thank goodness they were able to return to their homes about 4 hours before the polls opened, and people were able to go home. Those who wanted to vote could get their ballot, cast their vote, put it in a drop box. But had we not had that option, I would have needed another way to help those people vote. Otherwise, I am taking away their right to vote. So I understand that there are issues and that there are risks, and I'm not advocating for every single person to vote remotely. I still will mail every one of my 330 active registered voters a ballot. I will still continue to verify those signatures and to keep those paper ballots. I will still have early voting locations available for my citizens, and I will still have polling locations on election day. But what I, as an election official, need is, number one, I need to expand access to people with housing insecurity, people at lower areas of the socioeconomic ladder, people who live rurally, those with disabilities, those living overseas, or in the case of a natural disaster or an emergency. We've got to have a way for people to vote. Otherwise, we are issuing them essentially a poll tax and creating a barrier for them to vote. I think that's unconstitutional. But what I really need is I need a set of standards for secure remote voting that I can use to judge mobile voting options against. These standards can have caveats. These standards can say for those with disabilities, those overseas, those quarantined because they had a positive COVID test, or in the case of a natural disaster. But in the case that we need the ability to bring somebody a ballot, I've got to have a set of standards. I personally prefer blockchain because it gives me the ability to do some audits. Now, can I audit that completely end to end? No, because of a secret ballot. That is something that people have a right to, and I fully support that. But what the blockchain does is when I print off ballots from people who used remote voting, It gives me the ability to take that paper ballot that I just printed, and I can have a hash on that paper ballot, and I can check that hash against a block on the blockchain, and I can say whether or not the paper ballot that I've printed, that I'm going to put through my scanners with all of my other ballots, I can see if it matches that blockchain record. Now,
Amelia, I got to give you a 1-minute warning.
that's fine. So the last thing I do want to say is the last speaker that talked about using a blockchain to secure the voter registration system, it is a fantastic idea. I have actually been talking about that for a year, and I still have not seen any company come forward with that as a solution. I think, by the way, that is the perfect example for blockchains and voting. So thank you for bringing that up. That is securing the voter registration database in a blockchain so that it cannot be tampered with. Can you imagine if someone tampered with that database and I sent 330,000 ballots to the wrong addresses because someone tampered with that database? So I think that's the perfect idea for blockchain. In the meantime, I want to be able to use blockchain to audit accessible voting, because accessible voting needs to be a reality.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amelia. And I failed to mention that Amelia is a winner of the 2020 GBA Leadership Award, which was handed out in the United States Capitol in January 2020. So
Thank you.
and we'll see her. And she's also the judge leading the judging team for the next award. All right. With that, Philip Andre, the man, the legend, the guy who calls me up at all hours of the day and always has something to say. The floor is yours.
First, can you share my,
Yep.
allow me to,
Yep.
to
Yep.
use the screen?
Yep, I just unshared. It's all you.
Okay, thank you. So it's nice to be able to follow Amelia, who is one of our clients and has been one of the people driving us to the form of excellence and the focus on security that lives behind the solution that we at Votes had done. First, a little bit of background on myself. I come out of the payments industry, and for my sins, I am responsible for defining and working with Visa and MasterCard to create the standard that defines the secure element that you all find on your payment cards and you find inside your Google wallets and your Apple Pay devices, a place that we're able to store and manage cryptographic processes and essential to what we've done inside the Votes environment. The other part of my background is I've had the opportunity to sit down with a number of cryptographers. I can remember back in 1994, having the pleasure of sitting down with David Schoem in a Belgian coffee shop near the Gare du Midi, talking about the essential characteristics of digital signatures and digital certificates. And a couple of months ago, I was going back through some of the papers he delivered to me, and I found a slide that was reminiscent of what we now call the blockchain that he presented to a Visa, MasterCard, Europay group when we were looking at the concepts of digital certificates and DigiCash and other means of revolutionizing the way we looked at money. So in March of last year, Nimit asked me to join him as part of the Votes environment. He and I had worked together at a company called Idemia, which is a company that sells secure elements to people like Apple and Samsung and others, and builds and develops smart cards and creates security solutions that are used by people like the Federal Bureau of Investigation and police forces around the world, and is behind what is inside the Indian Aadhaar system. And he wanted to build and has built a secure, accessible remote ballot delivery, marking, and return solution using the integrity of the blockchain, making sure that we use the integrity of applications, and making sure that we understood that security was a journey that we needed to manage and go forward with. And we looked at the problems that Amelia has set in front of you, which is this question of the overseas voter who may be sitting in a manhole, or excuse me, a foxhole defending this nation, unable to get to a printer, unable to get to a post office, assuming he could get to a printer, and expecting to be able to participate in the election process. We cannot disenfranchise those people. And the disabled who may not be able to read the paper ballot because they're blind, and they may not be able to mark the paper ballot because they have no hands and can use the technologies that we as practitioners of technology have built for them to enable them, as Stephen Hawking so aptly demonstrated, the ability to write when he had cerebral palsy. We wanted to make sure we securely addressed this question of remote voting. We wanted a mechanism to deal with the identity of the individual. We wanted a mechanism to make sure that it was the same individual who was linked to the voter registry that was being authenticated. We knew we had to deal with privacy. We had to deal with the concepts of anonymity, and we had to create an immutable record of the marked ballot. We also recognized that we had to deal with the accessibility of those abroad and at home. We needed to make sure that we served everybody. We did not want to have a solution that only supported the able-bodied. We had to also support the disabled and the remote. And we needed, as I said earlier, to make sure that we addressed the question of anonymity and end-to-end verifiability. Audrey talked about the verifiable ballot, that paper ballot. What we do is we create 3 different copies of the exact same material that through the audit process that can and is a civilian enabled audit process, the ability to create a receipt that is returned to the voter. We create a paper ballot that, as Amelia has talked about, can be hashed, and we create a record on the blockchain. And when we do the audit, post-audit, be it by a third-party professional auditor, be it by the 2 or 3 parties that are involved in the election process, be it by the loser who has just lost the election, or be it by the citizen, we allow everyone to be able to look at the 3 copies of the marked ballot and confirm that the markings as seen by the voter on the receipt equal the markings as scanned by the election officials at the polling place and as recorded in an immutable record on the blockchain. Security. Security has been something I've been dealing with since I came out of university. I take the point that cybersecurity is a new term, but the concepts of security, the concepts of authentication, the needs to secure our environment are as old as computer systems. And we recognize that we've got to address the question of the device. And when we think about voting and we move the ballot marking to the device, we change the attack surface. It's not the server in the middle. It's not the central office in the middle. It's not the polling place that has human beings. It is the millions of devices that are being uniquely operated by the millions of voters. We then look at the networks and make sure that we build out networks. Part of the value of blockchain and the distributed ledger is I write to many. So a denial of service attack means that I've got to figure out every node that somebody sending in their ballot from their device is writing to. And then we recognize the distributed nature of a distributed ledger. If I change one record, I don't change the result. I have to change, in our case, 100% of the records to alter the content. It's redundant. If one server blows up, the other nodes on the network are protected. And through the use of digital signatures, through the use of hashes, through the use of the chain, the record is immutable.
And Philip, I got to give you a 2-minute warning.
That's perfect. In terms of where we are, we understand that prevention and detection are essential. So we build into our applications, into our processes, into the human environment, the need to prevent security attacks. And we then make sure that our technologies are able to assist us in detecting attacks. We've had 75 elections. We have never been hacked. People have tried. We have announced that they have tried, and we've been blamed for announcing that somebody attempted to hack into an election. And finally, it is a journey. It's layering. It is all about continually improving on security, because like every method, there will always be a threat vector. And it's our job as the implementers, as the practitioners, as the election officials to make sure that we always address the future and known threat vectors that exist. And that brings me to the end of my conversation today.
Wow, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of the panelists so far for respecting the time and being so easy to work with. So next we've got Giles. So Philip, yep, thank you very much. Giles, the floor is yours. So Giles comes to us from around the world. I guess you're in France. And if you guys wouldn't mind, and I'm grateful that the chat is so incredibly interactive, just for my sake, if you wouldn't mind putting where you're calling in from, it would be great to see sort of geographically what kind of group we have. But Giles, the floor is all yours, my friend.
Thanks, Gerard. Can I also share my screen?
Please.
Okay.
And again, the chat is open, so anybody can talk to anybody. Again, this is a place for us to build community and to help people connect, communicate, and collaborate. So we really, I'm excited about all of the conversations that are happening. Giles, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Gerard, and thanks for all the other panelists for, such a high-level discussion. So on my side, I'll be briefly presenting our initiative, which is called Electis. I think we're very complementary to the different initiatives that were mentioned today, in the sense that we're not a solution provider as such. We're not an organizer, an authority. I would say we're in between. We're a nonprofit trying to bring together all the different actors into a do tank, because I think what all the different conversations just showed, over the past hour, is as much we need to reconcile different approaches between what are the needs from the citizens, from the organizers, just as Amelia, you were just mentioning in terms of what citizens in your constituency were asking for, what solutions can provide in terms of security, but also in terms of usability, as Philippe was just mentioning about the incredible solution they built, but also the concern that raised from the academic world about and they're more than legitimate about what is the embedded security of all these solutions, and where we thought maybe we need a place in the middle, which is fully nonprofit, so we're free of any conflict of interest, where doers meet. So the solutions meets the organizer, meets the user, meets the activist around e-voting. So we see in the end, what kind of solution fits what kind of need. So this is how we came out with Electis.
Hey Giles, I don't see your slides, so I don't know if you're actually sharing them.
Okay, so maybe I didn't press the right button. Yep, sorry. Is that?
And
does that work now?
Now we see. Yep. Now we see your slides.
Yep. Okay. So yeah. So I was just presenting the Electis program as such. So the idea is, how do you bridge or how you make communities and academic world, meet the e-voting experiment in a decentralized, open source, and nonprofit way. I talked about the nonprofits because we do believe that democracy needs also in the middle. We need for-profit actors to build solutions. We need institutions, but we need also a nonprofit space for testing and assessing all the solutions. It needs open source as a second principle, because we're talking about the backbones of democracy, and I think citizens have a right to to accept open source programs and be sure what's behind the solutions that are proposed. And also, of course, we're here to talk about blockchain. So the decentralized approach of these solutions is key also to Electis I would say the solution themselves provide increased transparency and security while being decentralized, but it also allows for better citizens' participation and monitoring of the solution. So I think the key concept we want to put there, we all agreed, and I think that was mentioned from several panelists, that we'll never have 100% safe solution, of course. And in the first place, paper ballot voting is not 100% safe itself. And I think there's a level of risk that a community is really ready to take. And when we talk about paper ballot, of course, in-mail voting, and as we said recently, is a particular kind of paper ballot, which raises even more concern about security. So the whole thing has to be balanced in terms of there's no 100% safe security. So what is actually trustable? And the real question is trust. What does a community feel trustable? Ourselves, electees, we step one step aside from sovereign voting, thinking that maybe the first safe place where to experiment all these solutions is not per se directly sovereign voting because of all these concerns. It's smaller communities, NGOs, actors that are in need of increased legitimacy for what they do. And I think that's interesting because it's also a place where we feel today a lot of political momentum. There's so many things happening, and from Black Lives Matters to Fridays for Future to movements for the environment around the world. This is a very, very lively force. And of course, these elections do not have the same stakes that sovereign election because we're starting from zero. There's almost nothing happening in terms of security today. And they are willing and they are really requesting new solutions to be more legitimate. So that's a focus for electees. We say, how can we empower these grassroots movements with the tools that can make them more legitimate? Now to come to blockchain, how do we use blockchain ourselves? Because we've developed our own solution to share within the community. But again, we welcome any solution which is open source and non-profit and free of use. We ourselves, with the support of the Tezos Foundation, we've built a solution. We do use the blockchain as, I would say, the equivalent of a paper trail. Amelia was saying, one thing which is amazing about blockchain is the auditability, of course, of in the end, because you have immutable register. What struck us when we engage with communities and when we compare with ballot voting is how much people, in the end, really just trust paper, and something that they're not comfortable with remote e-voting is where does my vote go? Where are these numbers? Where do they end up? What's the reality of it? It seems, for non-tech people, it seems so abstract, so out in the air. How can you ground it the way paper grounds it? And I think blockchain is a very promising solution in that way because it does ground it.
Hey, Giles, Giles, I got to give you a 3-minute warning.
Thanks. So I wouldn't go into the technical architecture we're using, just to mention that, the solution itself doesn't have to be fully decentralized entirely in the blockchain because we know how many issues it can raise if all the voting is occurring on the blockchain. But you can have centralized solution where a decentralized record at the end, which is the one we're using. And I'm happy later in the open discussion to go back on the electees app. And of course, this is an ongoing process, and there's so more that can be added in our solution, in other solution. This is a very lively space, and I'm again very grateful to you, Gerard, and to the GBA to give me this opportunity that we all exchange between our solutions, because I think at the end of the day, we're sort of building together the backbone of next day architecture. Last thing, is a call for help for everyone who's here, attending the presentation. We need your help, us electees, because again, we're not we're not doing sovereign elections. We're doing grassroots elections. So everyone, in a way, is a grassroots citizen. Everyone is part of an organization, a community that needs to be empowered, that is interested, that wants to see the future of democracy. join us, reach out to us. We can help you organize elections. You can help us test these solutions, and we can all together at the end discuss about it. So I will conclude here. And we're happy to. I think this is not the time for a demo, but definitely happy to give further details to anyone who's interested.
And then if you would like to make this presentation available in our downloads folder, which I'll share at the end, that's
Sure.
awesome. And
Sure.
I've scheduled another event on April 8th. I think it's April 8th, which is a Thursday, either 8th or 18th. I think it's the 8th, which we'll talk about later, so that we can peel the onion back a little further. With that, so Meech is not going to be able to join us, but we got some other folks from Ton Labs on the call. So Eugene, Ron, do one of you guys want to basically pick up the thing? And
Jared, I think Paul is gonna do it for me. Mita had a last minute emergency, so Paul is gonna take care of it.
Paul, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Jared. Thank you for having us. Pavel Prigalov, CSO of Ton Labs, core developer of Freeton blockchain. So I will be very short because many argument was already presented, especially in that in the chat when very interesting discussion is going. So I would like to start saying that, of course, elections is actually, it is very important for the integrity of a society. So we do not have right for mistake, that's for sure.
Pavel, can you also share a little bit about Ton and your community, because the approach that you take to solving problems is really fantastic. And I've put a copy of the comparison that you did in the downloads folder, so people have access to it.
Yeah, I'm going there. So we are taking everything connected to voting, to elections quite seriously. So Freeton actually is community-driven blockchain. So we never did any ICO. All tokens distributed in a meritocratic base through contests and partnerships. So the idea is that so for us, governance is not just an abstract thing. We put say billions of dollars in it into smart contract systems. So we doing now quite an amazing, from our standpoint, experiment. And as I said, from the one hand, elections for society well-being is more important in that respect than any number of billions of dollars. But at the same time, I think that nobody in this room doubts that at some point, remote elections or electronic elections or blockchain elections, what you can call it different ways, at some point they will happen. So somebody worth to try to do it. And in what we do in our way to support that to happen, so we actually do crowdsourcing from our community. We now had already 2 contests. One of them was about proposing solutions for audit of elections in Guatemala, because there was a very famous story in Latin America where there were some rumors, at least, that elections were forged, and the initiative group of people tried to verify it, but they do it like in a very quick and dirty way. And we launched a contest on collecting ideas how to do it and how to build a system, much better crowd system, which again will be based on millions of people on the ground from the country. So we got tens of submissions, and finally, at the end, we now launch an implementation contest. So the idea that like by this summer, because it's quite a complex system, which should handle millions and tens of millions of people simultaneously working with uploading documents, with verifying documents, we will have that solution. And we expect not one solution, but we expect, I don't know, 3, 5, so different solutions for different teams. So we think that from that standpoint, Triton probably will become the first decentralized platform which will be used in to influence some real life election process. That's how we feel about what's going on. And I don't want to go into details. There are a lot of technical innovation, say, improvements or novelty in Triton. That's why it could handle that load. It could handle such a use case. So that's why we're confident that it will happen. Regarding blockchain voting itself, we had another contest where we asked our community to propose an argument to opposite the paper where there were critics for blockchain voting, which was prepared by a number of reputable researchers, mostly from MIT. And at the end, so actually it also got 49 submissions, and the very short summary out of that contest I prepared. And Gerard said that he shared it in download folder. So what is important about results of that opposition? Yeah, could you please share? Let me share my screen.
Yep, saw you.
Okay, yeah. So very simple. So framework which proposed in that paper was fine, absolutely fine. So all criteria which were presented there for a voting system, and we collected and put a number for it. And what we did then we said, okay, there are two different situations. One is remote voting and another is in-person voting. So then, in order to be how say fair, we just did a comparison. We said for each criteria, we compared for remote voting mail-in ballots and blockchain voting, and for in-person voting paper only paper ballots and blockchain voting. And what is amazing, I mean, and again, I welcome everyone to make comments and contact, because there is a lot of technical stuff in it, some architecture discussions. But what is amazing that we did not find any single criteria upon which paper only voting is better than blockchain voting. That's the statement. So let's not go now into technical details, but when you compare apples to apples, when you divide, when you use right framework, so to look separately at this remote voting and in-person voting, then you, I mean, we can have a different session for that, but it is impossible to prove that paper-only voting at any single criteria is better than blockchain voting. All for me.
Oh, that's it?
Yes, I said that I will be very short, because not to repeat all argumentation, which was
excellent.
said before.
Well, I can add just really quickly, like the document is actually in the folder, and I really encourage everybody to please go and read it. Hi, I'm Ron Malo. I'm also the CBDO from Ton Labs. If you actually read it, it was very specifically generated by, again, a crowdsourced vote and crowdsourced solutions. So it's not one person or one company that did it. It's basically a community of people. Mostly very technical, unlike myself. And it basically demonstrates what is there. And we welcome anybody to come and argue it and challenge it. And we'd love to participate in the next call that you said, I think, April 8th.
Oh, but sorry about that. And by the way, I mean, we had some discussion in the chat regarding HSMs about digital identity, and I had the argument that before digital identity will be implemented, there no way for have blockchain voting. Guys, you know, this is a very cheap device. It's available, so you can order it and you can get it, and and such device can significantly change, I mean, security in remote voting and I don't see any problem. I mean, if you compare how much money spent on elections, and you compare like to distributing people with such devices, then I mean, probably one cost of such solution will be for and again, from cost perspective, it also will be much better for any government to use such approach.
Yeah, and so let me just kind of walk through what I'd like to do over the next couple of minutes. I did put in the chat a link to the downloads folder. I'm going to put a QR code up here in just a second. What I'd like to do, if you have any questions, that you'd like to address, please raise your hand, and then we'd be happy to recognize you and give you that opportunity to ask your questions. And in terms of the topics, right, I'd like to again remind you guys that that we could look at, in fact, I'll put this up: convenience and anonymity and privacy, resilience, accessibility, security, auditability and trust, and equity. Those are some of the areas that we've been talking about, and people have been coming at it from their different perspectives. So at this point, if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and if we don't see any, then I'm just going to ask some, because I'm just naturally a very inquisitive person. And so the first question I want to ask to Amelia, right, since you've actually implemented a blockchain solution in Utah, can you walk us through a little bit about how that came to be? What kind of opposition did you deal with, right? Because you know, I'm guessing it wasn't like a hot knife cutting through butter. And
Right.
and how did you deal with or address some of that opposition?
Hello.
Hey, you're off mute, whoever that was. Okay.
Okay.
All right, let me just mute whoever that person was. I think it's back on mute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. So yeah, one way. So let's see. How did I get started on this? So I became an elected official in January of 2019. I'm fairly new to the game, and I had to start from the ground up. My county was literally called the epicenter of dysfunction by the governor of our state because of our county clerk's office. So when I came into office, particularly with the election system, I had to start from the ground up and rebuild everything. So basically, we had to redo everything from the ground up in our election system. And particularly, we had to change the way we did the overseas and military voters and the UCAVA voters. And so as we went through that system, we were approached by dozens of vendors. And those dozens of vendors basically came through and gave us their solutions. And the solution that we came up with was utilizing these mobile phones, because, like I said, my chief deputy, Josh Daniels, in Iraq, he was unable to vote. When I was in Canada, I was unable to vote. And so what we were looking for was some sort of a system that would allow us to integrate this voting into our existing systems. And so we wanted one that was auditable. And we required, before we were willing to adopt any system, I required that there be a third-party audit. So we contracted with the National Cybersecurity Center, and they agreed to do a full audit. Now, we started with just a very small pilot. We used a municipal election, which is typically going to be the smallest election that you ever do. We used a municipal election, and it was a municipal primary. And we only utilized this for our overseas and military voters. And the reason we started with that demographic is because in the state of Utah, I'm required to accept email ballots from that demographic. So when I talked about comparing things to reality, when I looked at this remote mobile voting, I wasn't comparing it to paper at the polls on election day. I wasn't comparing it to the utopia of a person that can walk, see, drive, and use their hands. What I was comparing it to was email, Yahoo, and Google. That's what I was comparing this to. So as I started, I wanted to look for a solution that was better for the voters, that increased access, and that didn't, during these pilots, increase any risk of security. And like I said, I'm comparing that to email. And so when I combined that this is safer than Yahoo and Google, and then I combined that with an audit from a third party from the National Cybersecurity Center, I felt that that was a very good area that we could control this pilot. So we did that in just the municipal primary. Now, we had raving reviews from the people who used it. We had people saying, I have lived overseas for 4 years and I've not been able to successfully vote a single time using the existing methods. Either the mail didn't come, or I didn't have access to a printer, or I couldn't return it in time, or I had to waive my right to privacy. People loved it. So then the next election, we did it again, but we expanded it for voters with disabilities. And once again, we actually found that we had a higher rate of UCAVA voters, that's the overseas and military voters. We had a higher rate of UCAVA voters that were voting than we've ever seen before. We had a higher rate of UCAVA voters in the municipal election than we had in voters here in our county. So it's very interesting for me when I see someone say things like, studies show that it doesn't increase voter turnout, because actuals show that in our county, for those people that are eligible for it, it significantly increases the likelihood that they can vote. So our UCAVA voters love it. I let them know that there are inherent risks with this, that there's a potential for them to be geocached when they use their phone to identify themselves and do their selfie. There's a chance that their location can be geocached. We do that in case any of the people voting are in a sensitive situation where maybe their location shouldn't be known. But what we have found is that those voters, they find it more secure than email. They find it more convenient than email, and they vote at a higher rate. So once I found that through this very small controlled pilot, then in 2020, that allowed us to be able to utilize this for the overseas, military, and disabled voters. And we've never used it. We had 292,000 voters in our last election, and we had about 1,000 use their phone. So it is not a significant percentage at all. We didn't have a single election that could have been swung one way or another by these voters. But what we had was 1,000 more citizens who were able to vote, and their alternative available to them was email. So it's not like I'm creating a new riskier method. I'm actually finding a more convenient, more secure way for people who were voting via email to vote.
Awesome. And then, but I want to talk a little bit about, and this is almost from a legal regulatory perspective. What sort of were the laws and the regulations such that you could do this easily? Were there changes that you had to make? Were there constraints that you had to work through? What about from a legal and regulatory perspective?
So for this, I did not. So for all election officials, we are required under federal law to deliver ballots to overseas and military citizens electronically. And 31 states in the District of Columbia require election officials like myself to accept ballots back electronically. The usual method is via email. And so I already was required by law to accept things back electronically, voted ballots back electronically. But this was just an alternative method. So I didn't have to change any laws to do that. There's also another law in the state of Utah that says any method available to a UCAVA voter is also available to a voter with a disability. So in this case, I didn't have to change any laws to use that. I am interested in changing the laws so that we can add a contingency plan, meaning if there's a natural disaster or a state of emergency, we can't not hold our election, in November. But what we could do is provide an alternate method for voting. So I am interested in updating laws that allow for alternative voting methods in the case of an emergency, something like a wildfire, earthquake, hurricane, tornado, or a pandemic, in the case that people can't get to the polls.
Awesome. I'd like to kind of turn this over to us, and I apologize. I had to sort of shut things down. Obviously, this was our very first experience with the Zoom bomber, so we just had to lock it all down. And I apologize to anybody who
I'll pull up the chat, and I can be answering questions in chat.
I actually had to shut the chat down simply because whoever that person was putting ugly stuff in there. So I apologize. If you do raise your hand, I'll just have to sort of unmute you one person at a time. But I want to turn the questions over to OSET. Tell us a little bit about your success stories, right? I know that you guys have been building out some technologies, and specifically, I'm interested in things that you had to overcome, and sort of how you did that, so people can kind of get some lessons learned. So let's see, John, let me just find you real quick if you're here. John, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
I'm unmuted. What I'm not doing is actually being able to see the screen. So hold on a second. Okay. So I think the mark that Amelia is shooting for and that she articulated is essential. And given her job, it's the right mark to shoot for because she's applying principles of comparative risk management. So, you know, if email is allowed and it's less secure and less convenient than something else, it makes sense to explore other options. But more of the work that we're doing is trying to shoot for a higher mark where the technology is suitable for all voters, and including contingency plans. And that's one where legislative enablement is a real issue. So as I think some people mentioned in the chat, if you're going to have meaningful internet voting, like in Estonia, for example, you need to have digital ID. Digital ID is just a stupendously hard problem, both logistically and legally in the United States. So if you don't have digital ID, if you can't really authenticate voters, that's a really significant problem for election officials. Now, what we've seen in pilots to serve Uokava voters, for example, there's a carve out for that Amelia mentioned that obviates probably one of the most difficult legal issues and regulatory issues, which is that except for that carve out, absentee voting, whether it's paper or anything, is a process where the election officials have the sole responsibility for viewing the absentee voter's affidavit and deciding whether or not to count the ballot, often based on signature comparison, for example. If you don't have a carve out for that, then you literally can't legally use an internet voting system where, you know, a third party vendor does a selfie comparison and that's how you decide whether somebody votes. So those are really, really serious issues that go to digital ID issues. And those are ones that at OSET, we're basically trying to work around at this point. So we're developing a home voting system, the principal purpose of which is to not disenfranchise handicapped voters by making them use ballots that need transcription. Transcribing ballots means that the voter's experience is neither private nor independent. And that's an equal access and an equal rights issue. And that's what we're focusing on in the near term, because that's a much more tractable issue. I think I have a furry friend in the camera here. Excuse me, Dobbs. There we go. So that's sort of two answers to one question, which is, you know, what are the legal regulatory issues that we look at and how did we respond to them? We picked some lower hanging fruit for now.
Excellent. And then Pavel, you want to say something, so I'm asking you to unmute. You should be able to unmute.
Yes, just quickly. So again, I don't think that you require national ID to make votes. You know, like iPhone appeared like what, 3 years, and now I mean all my phone, not every smartphone have it, at least some. Moreover,
Pavel, I'm afraid that you got a bad internet connection and we're losing you. I do want. Let me come back to you. Hopefully your signal comes back up. I want to throw something over to Philip. And Philip, one of the things that has been brought up, and you moved through it quickly, but I'd like to really kind of explore it. One of the big concerns about blockchain voting is the security aspect, right? And whether somebody can tamper with the vote or whatever. Do you want to walk through? Just take a minute or two and just kind of walk through why your solution is secure, and how do you address some of those concerns. So let me just ask you to unmute yourself. All right. So I think that you can unmute yourself.
Okay.
And by the way, I've shut down the video sharing, and I can stop the share if you want to. But all right. So if you want to share your screen, go ahead and do that.
That's okay. I think what's important is to think about where and why we want to use the blockchain. The way Votes is implemented the blockchain is we have used it as an immutable record to be used during the post-audit election process. And just to be clear, when we say the post-audit election process, we invite the citizen to participate in that election process, as well as the duly appointed auditors and election officials that are involved. And we create 3 repositories of the marked ballot. The first repository is going to be a receipt, an encrypted receipt that will be returned to the voter so that they can confirm and verify that their vote is as they intended. The second goes into a digital lockbox that will be unlocked at the appropriate moment in time based on the regulatory foundation so that a printed ballot can be produced and used in the tabulation and the post-audit process, and if necessary, during a hand recount, and a third version on the blockchain. All 3 of those will be indexed by what we call the anonymous ID. And the anonymous ID is only known by the individual in terms of being able to link it to identity. It has no connection to geolocation. It has no connection to IP address. It has no connection to IMEI or any other discernible data that would allow somebody to link that anonymous ID to your individual. During the audit process, what's happening is the civilian is going to the audit portal and they're looking at the bulletin board that has a copy of the receipt they received. They're looking inside the digital lockbox at a copy or at the PDF version of the document that was printed, and they're looking at the blockchain and making sure that all 3 represent the exact same intent. If necessary, they could also go to the central office and they could ask Amelia and her team to go find that particular anonymous ID in the physically printed paper ballots to confirm that what was printed and tabulated matches. In the future, we would love to be able to integrate with the tabulation system so that we could also confirm that that anonymous ID was tabulated. At this point in time, where we are is we are making sure that we use the blockchain to assure the immutability of the record, and that we're using the audit process to provide the end-to-end verifiability that Audrey and others have defined as essential, this idea of E2E voter verifiability, which we also believe is essential. And we also believe that having a paper record of the intent of the voter is also an essential characteristic. Now, some people have argued that the problem is I can put garbage into a system and the garbage will remain in the system. And the purpose of the audit is to make sure that there is no garbage in the system. And the way we're controlling that is that you basically have one voter with one device with one anonymous ID, and it's that integrity that is then created through the audit process and through the mechanisms. And I'm not deep enough into software to give you a pure answer, but I'm more than happy to arrange the necessary conversations with a deep technologist to explain exactly how we achieve that result. And then again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. if you're going to attack our system, we talk about a retail wholesale attack. A retail attack means I've got to attack the consumer's device. Well, that's exactly what you would have to do in our environment, because it's the consumer's device that is going to broadcast that intent to the blockchain. And it's the audit that's going to confirm that that intent is exactly what's in the other 3 repositories.
Got it. Jeremy, would you like to, you got to have your hand up? Would you like to add something?
Sure, sure. Thanks for that explanation, Philip. I mean, it's really great that there are 3 copies. The problem is, well, there are many problems with it. We'll start with the fact that you're assuming that at least one of them is correct, excuse me, and so that you can determine if there's a discrepancy. What if the voter says, no, that's not right, that's not what I wanted, and maybe the voter is right, and maybe the voter is lying, and in fact, they just don't want it to be public how they voted. But now you have these 3 that are in agreement with each other, but the voter says, no, that's not what I wanted. And so now you have, how do you throw out the election because the voter says that's not what I wanted, or how do you deal with that? There's a lot of issues around the whole issue of if voters can see and prove at some level that they think this is what the system recorded. The software that you develop, what if it's wrong? What if there's a bug in your software? What if there's a
hey Jeremy, hey Jared,
as we saw with SolarWinds?
Jared, let's do one at a time.
Philip, okay, but wait a second. Philip presented a lot of statements that I think are really incorrect, and I think your listeners need to understand that there's a whole lot of assumptions behind what Philip talked about that are just not true in the real world of how software gets attacked. We saw with SolarWinds that SolarWinds, their update process was wrong, and someone forced a download to every SolarWinds installation in the world of incorrect software. So that's exactly the sort of attack that can happen, and you won't know about it.
Jeremy, I'm going to try to answer your questions, but I'm going to start with the last statement where you say my statements are incorrect. Let's have a conversation and let's have the discussion where you can look inside before you make a claim that my statements are incorrect.
Okay, and the MIT folks tried to do that, and I believe it was in the case of the MIT folks that you sicked DHS on them, claiming that they were trying to hack you.
No, that is not correct. So if you want to have an argument about the facts, let's get the facts correct.
So let me throw this in, right? Because we have 8 minutes before we wrap up. One of the things that I'd like,
Gerard, can I answer the question that he originally raised, which is that about the concern of the voter and making sure that the voter's intent is as intended, because that is the key question, and that question deserves an answer.
Go for it.
I mentioned that we make 3 copies. 1 copy is a receipt that is available to the voter immediately after they submit their ballot. And then in coordination with the election officials, we build a process that allows that voter to reach into the election official, and if they do not agree, to spoil that ballot and resubmit. So there are mechanisms based on the rules and regulations as defined by the election official to make sure that the voter's intent can be corrected in the event that the voter believes it's wrong. Obviously, post-election, the intent is as recorded, and we would not, unless the regulators agree that we should, allow somebody to change post-election their intent. But we do guarantee the voter the ability to review their ballot and the ability to confirm that their ballot is as received, and they compare their receipt to the other 2 copies to make sure.
And what if they disagree? And what about the requirement for the secret ballot? You shouldn't provide a mechanism that allows the voter to prove how they voted. That's a fundamental tenet of the secret ballot, is that voters shouldn't be able to prove how they voted, and
Jeremy,
you're allowing them to do it.
Jeremy, I took a picture of my ballot when I voted on paper, So I have a record of my ballot. So if you want to compare apples to apples, let's do that. Number two, if I do a printed ballot at home that was either mailed to me or printed on my machine, I have a copy of my ballot. So again, let's compare apples to apples.
So that Amelia, before I recognize, I just want to say one thing. We've talked about a lot of issues. One of the things that I'd like to do, and I'm going to talk to the voting working group, is let's take a recording of this event, because we've really hit a lot of things. And what I'd like to do is essentially make a similar paper to what the TON folks did, of the different issues and the different sort of arguments or positions on both sides, so that we can present to people, to the community, here are the issues and here is the perspective from both sides, so that people can generate their own conclusions. And then I'd love to present that at the next meeting. So incidentally, I put on the calendar April 8th. Right now, I haven't really fleshed it out, but if you click on April 8th on the GBA calendar, there is a registration form for attendance. And if you want to speak at this, then here it is. Oh no, blockchain and elections, April 8th. Right. So there's an opportunity.
Can I ask one final question, Philip?
Sure.
If Votes is so confident of the security of your system, why have you announced that you've gone through multiple security reviews, but you've refused to release any of them except the Trail of Bits review?
We'd be more than happy to sit down with you under a non-disclosure agreement. And
this should be public information. If your system is secure, the public deserves to understand whether it's secure.
Jeremy, can I finish my sentence before you interrupt? We would be more than happy to invite you and any other computer scientist to come inside under NDA and to look inside the software and provide us with any feedback and any criticism that you want to under non-disclosure. We invite you. And in fact, what we need to do if we're going to move this whole conversation forward is the academics need to identify the problems and work with the vendors and the community to develop the standards that address the problems that they have identified, and work with the vendors to correct the problems they identified. We welcome computer scientists who want to come in and work with us to create viable and reliable and bug-free solutions.
Jeremy, you got a formal invitation. Are you gonna take
no, because I'm not going to provide him free consulting under NDA and not be able to say anything that I find. That's not he's asking for free services from the research community, and won't even let them talk about what they do. That's not a useful solution.
Offer us a proposal, fee for service, and we would be more than happy to have that conversation.
I will share that with the community, and I'll make sure that everybody knows the answer.
I think that if we can move forward with something like that, then that would be a great service to not only just to Votes, but to all the vendors. Because look, we all want to find ways of using technology, driving out the bugs and the vulnerabilities, and getting a more secure, fair, accessible solutions. And Jeremy, I'd love to let's have this conversation again on April 8th and talk about the community's response and how that pathway looks. And I would welcome any vendor in the GBA community to potentially participate in something like that, because if we could get some of the smartest people in the room in with the vendors and progress the technology so that we can have more fair, open, transparent, secure, accessible elections, then that's a win-win for everybody. And Jiminy Crickets, there's so many people that want to talk, and we have 1 minute left. Amelia, why don't you go ahead and let me ask you to unmute. And I know Pavel, I'm going to.
I know we only have 1 minute left, but I wanted to say this real quick. We need to move forward in this space. Pilots are happening. things are happening. Laws in 32 states require return of electronic ballots. More states are starting to adopt laws that require that because accessibility is demanded by the citizens. The citizens are demanding accessibility. This will move forward. The alternative is email. Now, with that said, we can only move forward productively if we do not put up with bullying like I just heard from Jeremy. First of all, votes did not turn anyone into the Department of Homeland Security. The jurisdiction did. Mac Warner is a personal friend of mine from West Virginia. His election had a hack attempt. It was not known ahead of time that it was a researcher because they didn't say they were a researcher. They tried to hack a federal election, and that's a federal crime. And West Virginia turned in a hacker who apparently happened to be an academic that was trying to do research and never disclosed that to West Virginia. If anyone tries to hack my election, I will sic the FBI on them because I do not put up with that. I don't care if you're a college student or verified voting or OSET. If you try to hack my election, I will turn you in, and you bullying other people for doing that is not acceptable. We can move forward together as a community if we are honest, meaning we compare apples to apples, and we don't bully each other. It's not acceptable behavior, and it's not professional. So I want to move forward. I want to work with academics. I want to work with people, and I want to bring voting to people. I want to work with vendors like Votes and Democracy Live. I want to work with universities like MIT and Harvard, which, by the way, Democracy Live has gone to Harvard and MIT, and both have refused to work with Democracy Live. So I am more than happy to work with people. I want to work with people, but I want an honest conversation. I want to compare actual risk, and I will not put up with bullying.
Guys, it's 101, and I've been trying to be fair with everybody in terms of recognizing people's time. I'm excited about potentially where we can move forward. I did say at the beginning this was very controversial, but I do believe that we can work together, and it can be in everybody's best interest. I want to thank everyone for participating. Again, we have always been a very open community, and we've not locked things down. Unfortunately, the Zoom bomb that we got may force us to do that again, but we'll have to find other ways to have an open dialogue. And please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to participate in the April 8th event. And I'd like to thank everyone for participating. Thank you guys very much.